So back to the clinical trial. So this provides you with some of the main findings of the trial. And as I mentioned, it was independently conducted by a research team that out of Tampa, Florida. And through this randomized double-blind crossover study, placebo-controlled, and we found some very dramatic findings that were, quite frankly, even more powerful than what we had anticipated. So perhaps most importantly and most dramatically, we measured blood alcohol concentration, and we found that when you compare Unbuzzd, the beverage, with placebo, we found that in even just the first 30 minutes alone, Unbuzzd resulted in, on average, for most participants, a 40% acceleration of the clearance of alcohol from the bloodstream. So the blood alcohol concentration, that BAC, as it's known, BAC, was reduced 40% faster in just the first 30 minutes alone with Unbuzzd compared to placebo. And that this faster reduction of blood alcohol concentration, it was importantly statistically significant, which in simpler terms means that this was not something highly unlikely that it took place by chance. In fact, for a study, that's the measurement that you look for, is that it's statistically significant compared to the placebo. And it was observed throughout the time period that the participants were monitored. We also saw rapid improvements in alertness, in cognitive ability. Study participants reported, again, as early as those first 30 minutes after consuming Unbuzzd, participants described themselves as more alert, and objectively they made fewer cognitive errors as well in some of the tests that we conducted during the trial to measure cognitive ability and cognitive errors. So it significantly outperformed the placebo results. I had mentioned earlier about the physiologic changes that occur with intoxication, where typically your heart rate goes up and your blood pressure goes down. Well, we found in Unbuzzd that it lessened that elevation in heart rate that you normally see, and it lessened the drop in blood pressure that often also accompanies alcohol intoxication. So it stabilized both of those measurements. And we importantly asked, we didn't just measure objectively through testing, but we asked people how they perceived their level of impairment and other things like mental fatigue. And we found that Unbuzzd, in a statistically significant way, helped alleviate that self-perception of impairment and mental fatigue that is caused by alcohol intoxication. We also had that extra bonus, as I had referred to it as, where we saw fairly dramatic improvements in hangover as well. One of the measurements that we looked at was headache severity, and we found at both 4 and 8 hours, there was a dramatic decrease in the severity of headache, if there was a headache at all after Unbuzzd compared to placebo. So it does have that impact, not just the night of, if I can describe it that way, but also the morning after, or the hangover part. And importantly, Unbuzzd was well tolerated by all study participants, and there were no reported adverse side effects whatsoever.